Good morning, everyone. Don't worry, I'm just the opening act. I'm just here. My name is Danny Linden. I am the Creating Change Conference Director, and on behalf of the National LGBTQ Task Force in Creating Change, I just wanted to welcome you all here to San Francisco, to the San Francisco Hilton Union Square Hotel, and to our first in-person conference in 3 years, and to my first Creating Change in person ever. On behalf, again, of the task force, we're so grateful for all of you who registered, who attended. You know, we broke through all anticipated records for this year. I went out shopping for 2,100 conference bags, but apparently 3,200 people registered. So, you know, that's great on one hand, but you always feel bad when you run out of supplies. But as long as you all have the app, you can find any and everything you need during this conference. So please, just enjoy yourselves, learn, network, have a good time in the reunion that is Creating Change. I also just want to thank Ricky Levy for all of her hard work and her many, many emails to Danny Linden, just making sure that everything for this session was complete, organized, and I can't thank you enough for your organization, for your participation, because too often we don't get all of that, what we want, and so this only makes the session even better. The Institute, and of course, Matt Foreman, who emails me at least once a week. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Danny. You know, it's the 50th anniversary for Creating Change in the Task Force. It is the 20th anniversary. It is the 20th anniversary for the Woodhull Freedom Foundation. Isn't that special? I've been here for all 20 years. Oh, thank you. That's my son, Adam, who is running AV for us today. So, entrapment, harassment. I'm going to welcome you now to Woodhull's Human Rights Commission, the entrapment and harassment of the LGBTQI++ community. So a lot of the justification for laws is protection. We have to protect children. We have to protect each other. We have to protect ourselves. But is that really what these laws are about? When it's about sexuality, the laws are not about protection. They're about punishment. So if you think about that, and you think about entrapment, and you ask yourself, who's being protected? The answer is nobody. Someone tricked you into doing something you might or might not have done so that they could arrest you. It's about punishment. And it is a hideously destructive way of punishing people. And we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to begin by introducing Senator Scott Wiener. Senator Wiener represents San Francisco and northern San Mateo County in the California State Senate. Elected in 2016, Senator Wiener serves as chair of the Senate Housing Committee. He serves as co-chair of the California Legislative Jewish Caucus and chair of the Senate Mental Health Caucus. He's a past chair of the California Legislative LGBTQ Caucus. But I want to tell you a little bit about what Senator Wiener has done. Senator Wiener has dedicated much of his life to supporting the LGBT community, going back to 1990, when he came out in the middle of the AIDS crisis as a college student in North Carolina and volunteered on an AIDS crisis hotline. Over the 30 years since then, Senator Wiener has been one of the strongest LGBTQ civil rights champions in our country. It's particularly appropriate that Senator Wiener be with us this morning to discuss entrapment and harassment of this community, since he's the person responsible for the repeal of the Walking While Trans bill in California. During his first year in the Senate, Senator Wiener established an LGBT Senior Bill of Rights to protect LGBTQ seniors living in long-term care facilities from discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or HIV status. He also authored and passed a law to decriminalize HIV, to reduce stigma around HIV and improve public health outcomes. Thanks to Senator Wiener, California has a third non-binary option on state IDs. In 2018, Senator Wiener authored the Dignity and Opportunity Act to provide greater protection to transgender individuals in our criminal justice system. In 2020, Senator Wiener passed a law that requires prisons to house transgender incarcerated individuals according to where they're safest. And then another which mandates that all California healthcare providers collect sexual orientation and gender identity data on COVID-19 and all other reportable diseases. When states like Texas and Alabama made it a crime to seek or allow gender-affirming care, Senator Wiener responded by passing a bill that provides refuge for trans kids and their families here in California. Senator Wiener was the first public official in the nation to announce that he takes PrEP, which is a once-daily pill to essentially eliminate the risk of HIV infection. He did that to raise awareness around this powerful HIV preventative and to reduce the stigma surrounding it. Senator Wiener is an extraordinary human being who has done extraordinary work for us and all of our communities, and I am so proud to introduce you all to him. Senator. My name is supposed to come off.
It's okay, I can change my name. Great, thank you for that very kind introduction. You know, it's interesting, I came of age as a gay man in 1987 when I was 17 years old. That's a sort of genteel way of saying that's when I started having sex. And so imagine as a gay man, 17 years old in 1987, it was a terrifying time for our community around HIV in particular, and the sort of, for lack of a better phrase, the mass die-off that was happening in our community with no support from the federal government. And when we think about, 36 years later, so much has changed and so much is better. By the way, that year, 1987, was also the year that Nancy Pelosi was elected by San Franciscans to Congress, who went to Congress, and her first words on the House floor were, "I came here to fight AIDS." And so under her leadership and so much leadership in our community, a lot has changed since then. But unfortunately, we also see some of these statements that everything is good for LGBTQ people. We know that's not true. We know that was never true. That even with all the strides that we made and the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and national marriage equality and more civil rights laws in a number of states, we knew that it was never actually all perfectly good for our community. And of course, in the last 7 years, the Pandora's box has been opened. And I not going to just only blame Donald Trump. He certainly helped open that Pandora's box for a lot of communities, including our community. But we know that it was all already there. Donald Trump didn't create it. He just gave permission for it to come out of that box that was buried in the backyard. And we see it all the time now. Including just this morning, I saw a video of Charlie Kirk, one of the big MAGA guys, talking about literally we need to kill trans people. Imagine that. Imagine that is considered somehow acceptable political discourse in one of the political parties in this country. So we have so much work to do. And I was elected the same night, tragically, that Donald Trump was elected in 2016. It was sort of a weird thing going to my victory party and then having people crying at my victory party, and people texting me saying, I really want to come celebrate your victory, but I can't get out of bed. And so since then, we have been really just invigorating our fight. The whole movement has been, because we've had to. And one of the things that I've really focused on is ending the criminalization and targeting in the criminal justice system of our community. And people sometimes ask, well, wait, California? You're saying that when you got there in 2016, California, that we know, Texas, Alabama, this, that, and the other thing, but really California was still criminalizing queer people? And the answer was yes. And so we've done a lot of work, including bills when I got there, that Equality California and other advocacy groups literally for years couldn't even find an author to author these laws. So even in California, supermajority, democratic, progressive state, it was hard to even find authors for these bills. And I actually now understand why. Because I'm not saying this to garner sympathy. It's just the many thousands of death threats that I've gotten, including every few months bomb threats in my home, based on these bills for queer people, being targeted by Tucker Carlson, by Ted Cruz, by Donald Trump Jr. Again, I'm not trying to get sympathy. I'm a big boy. I can handle my stuff, and politics is really rough. But it's understandable why some elected officials might hesitate on these hard bills, because you know what you're getting yourself into, which members of this community who don't have the public platform that I have been dealing with forever. The harassment and threats and violence and intimidation, and people unlike me who do not have a platform to talk about it and who suffer in silence. But we have worked very hard to pass some of these laws to decriminalize and move away from the harassment and targeting of our community. I'm so grateful to my colleagues in the legislature, including Democrats who don't represent the easiest districts and who've cast very hard votes and been subject to re-election attacks as a result, and they've stood with our community. It was horrifying that we continued to have HIV being treated differently from tuberculosis and Ebola and much deadlier viruses, simply because in the 80s and 90s, people living with HIV were horribly targeted. And so if we had situations where people being trapped in abusive relationships because their abusive partner would say, if you leave me, I'm going to call the police and tell them that you didn't tell me that you had HIV, and so you're going to have to go to state prison because that's a felony. Situations where misdemeanor prostitution charges were then converted into a felony if the sex worker had HIV. Situations where there was literally no risk of transmission because the person with HIV was on medication and was suppressed, and the other person was on PrEP. Literally, no risk of transmission, still a felony. And we were able to get rid of those laws. We weren't the first. Colorado and Iowa did it before us, but we were able to do that here in California. This is one that wasn't mentioned in the intro, but has been a really traumatic one, which is fixing California's broken sex offender registry. California was one of only, I think, 4 states where if you went onto the sex offender registry for any reason, whether you were a sexually violent predator or whether you were a gay guy who was arrested for having sex in a car in 1968, you were on the sex offender registry forever, and there was literally no way to get off it, with all of the repercussions. And that was true even if you were a 16-year-old who went on the sex offender, because California puts kids on the sex offender registry, on it for the rest of your life. There was no way legally to get off of that registry. And so we worked very hard to first create a tiering of the registry to say the predators are going to stay on, but for other offenses, we're going to give you a path to get off after a certain number of years. We then, and there were literally like 80-something-year-old gay men who would stop me on the street saying, I got put on the registry 50 years ago for having sex in a park, and thank you for giving me hope that I might get off the registry before I die. This is like what people have been living with forever because they were so targeted. And then we did a bill to, because for teenagers, for when you have like the 19-year-old having sex with a 17, 16-year-old, if they were straight, the judge didn't have to put them on the registry. They could look at the facts of the case and decide. If they were gay, if they were engaging in non-vaginal intercourse, the judge was required to put them on the registry no matter what, no discretion whatsoever. And that's because when the registry was created, there were anti-sodomy laws, so our sex was illegal. And it was just outrageous. And we got that fixed to say, let's just treat the queer kids the same as the straight kids. It's good enough for the straight kids for the last 75 years, it's good enough for the queer kids too. And we got that passed. That bill set off an avalanche of QAnon, MAGA craziness unlike anything I've ever seen before, that we were like legalizing pedophilia. Why? Simply because we were saying, let's treat our kids the same way as the straight kids. And then there was SB 357, we heard of repealing the walking while trans law, loitering with intent to commit prostitution. We weren't the first state to repeal it. New York State, under the leadership of my law school classmate, Senator Brad Hoylman, repealed it first, and it was signed into law. And that law, it is so pernicious, it's just unbelievable that was ever enacted in California in the 1990s, to say literally that you can arrest someone because they're wearing a short skirt, a bunch of lipstick, and high heels. That's literally enough to arrest someone and give them a criminal record because they quote unquote look like a sex worker and quote unquote look like they intend to engage in sex work. It's sort of wild that we would, not like 100 years ago, all sorts of laws, crazy laws were passed. But this was in California in the 1990s, passed that law. And so we worked really hard with a great coalition to get it repealed, to talk about how this was targeting particularly trans women and particularly black trans women. And I think so many of my colleagues sort of looked at it and they're like, yeah, you shouldn't be arresting someone for that. And so we were able to get that repealed. It was definitely contentious. The repeal went into effect January 1st of this year. We passed it in 21. The governor signed it last year. But there has now been a backlash against that. And we have certain spots in California, in certain parts of the Mission, in San Francisco, International Boulevard, in Oakland, certain parts of LA, where there have been long-term some challenges around sex work on the streets and some very, very young seem like kids who are there, and just some real challenges for these neighborhoods. And unfortunately, we have law enforcement blaming this repeal for that, even though the current upswing started a year and a half before this law even went into effect. But the police, because these are challenging situations, they don't want to deal with it, they're blaming the repeal of our law. And along with all of the other demonization that we see towards our community from right-wing media is also latching on to this. That this law was a law basically legalizing human trafficking, legalizing pimping, just really extreme statements, and that police no longer have any way to deal with any of these issues, as if we don't have strong human trafficking laws and other laws that could be used in situations that need to be addressed. But the other piece of it is that, when I talk to neighbors on some of the impacted my constituents in the Mission, on Cap Street and surrounding area that are impacted by this, that have a bad situation on their street, right there. It's not a good situation for anyone involved. They all say to me, well, we don't want to arrest sex workers, but then they don't know what else to do. And so it just becomes a very intense situation, and these grifters, whether some, not all, but some in law enforcement and certainly in right-wing media, latch on and say, because you repealed this pernicious, horrible law, this is causing human trafficking, and it's false. And I don't think they're doing it, at least I don't think necessarily to go after our community, but they're using us sort of as a convenient scapegoat to say, because your community got this horrible transphobic law repealed, that means that we can't address human trafficking when we see a 14-year-old girl on the street and we want to help her, as if giving her an arrest record is going to somehow help her get out of whatever situation she's in. So the work continues, and you can only imagine, I know you know, you're all very active, knowledgeable people, that if we're dealing with that in California, if these laws until very recently were on the books in California, if it was a huge fight to get them off the books in California, if we're having a backlash even here in California, I can only imagine how it is in other states. And so an enormous work lies ahead, but this is righteous work, and I am just so proud of the coalition that we have built around these laws. And I particularly really want to give a shout out to, first of all, to the sex worker-led organizations and trans-led organizations we've worked with who have just been absolutely tremendous and on the ground and helping us connect with people who are going through very, very lived experience, whether in prison or on the streets, and that's been invaluable. And also Equality California, which has really gone to the mat for these bills and has held lawmakers accountable to say, standing with our community doesn't, yes, you need to support marriage equality and anti-discrimination in the workplace, and all that's critically important, but you also need to support our community when it's politically hard. And so EQCA has really done that, and I'm very appreciative for that. So thank you. I hope we have a wonderful discussion today, and I appreciate all of your work.
You know, I was listening to Senator Wiener, and I was thinking that it's worth noting there is no one issue for one community. As Audre Lorde said, we are not, I'm going to misquote her, we are not single issue people because we do not live single issue lives. I was also reminded of testimony we gave in Washington, D.C. When they were trying to enact permanent prostitution-free zones. Now recognize prostitution is not legal in D.C., but in these zones, it's even more illegal, because it's Washington, D.C. We renamed what they were trying to do constitution-free zones, because all of your constitutional rights were suspended in these zones. We also framed our argument in terms of the human rights violation. The United States, believe it or not, has agreed since 2011 that violence against sex workers is a human rights violation. It shouldn't have taken as long as it did for somebody to say that, but it did. And that's what we brought up in our testimony. And after a pretty contentious debate, I went up to the person I had been working with on the council, and I said, "What do you think?" And the person said, "Thank God you used a human rights framework. It's an election year, and none of us can be seen to be pro-prostitution, but we can all be seen to be pro-human rights." It is about human rights. Okay, enough of me. Mandy's rolling her eyes. I want to introduce our commissioners, who are over here. I want to introduce you to Mariah Grant. Mariah is a consultant for human rights and a migration specialist with a focus on migrant and sex worker rights, freedom of movement, and labor exploitation. Mariah has a Master of Arts in Human Rights and Democratization, Asia Pacific, from the University of Sydney. She completed her thesis on the use of human rights impact assessments by sex worker rights and anti-trafficking NGOs in Thailand. Thank you for being here, Mariah. I'm going to move back and forth. Mandy's nodding, that must be right. You know, I get a lot of credit for putting on the Human Rights Commissions for all the programs that are Woodhull. The truth is that Mandy Sally, who's sitting right there, is the person who makes all the trains run on time. If you're on the commission, if you're in the room, you are here in large part because of Mandy's work. And holding your phone up won't help. I'm going to introduce you to our first witness, Luisa Rivera. Luisa is a Mexican-born, Spanish-speaking immigrant rights activist and trans Latina sex worker activist who staunchly advocates for her Latinx, LGBTQIA+ community. She takes pride in leading Marcha de las Putas. Did I do it right? All right. This group provides visibility to the Latinx and LGBTQIA sex workers community in the Tenderloin neighborhood of San Francisco, California. In addition, she's the founder and executive director, I'm never going to get this right, Voces Puteriles. She serves as policy and education co-chair for the HIV Advocacy Network, known as HAN, a grassroots LGBTQ and HIV activist group in the San Francisco Bay Area with over 700 members who advocate for funding-related services for her community, including sex workers. She's also a member of the Decriminalized Sex Work California Coalition. She's supported extensively throughout the U.S., including in California, Texas, Arizona, and Nevada, and internationally in Mexico, El Salvador, Peru, and Guatemala in Central America. She's well known for her commitment to working for the trans Latina sex worker and HIV communities. Please join me in welcoming Luisa.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to take my mask out. Yeah, indeed, but one of my biggest honor is be part of the Crisis Work Coalition, AB 57, AB 357. That's what it is. Entrapment and Harassment. What else I have to say about it? I can tell you a thousand stories about entrapment and harassment because I'm a trans Latinx immigrant from the beginning that I crossed the border all the way to today. And I can say so many things, but it's not my role to be here to talk about drama. It's my role to be here to talk about how good my life has been. Yes, indeed. What they say in the intro is true. I am. But I think that's the way I feel and I think it's enough of drama. We're going to say, well, okay, the cops stop me, they harass me, they push me up, they treat me as a man, which my ID says I'm a female? No. Enough is enough. It's about to talk how good life is. It's about to say, yes, I've been harassed, yes, I've been entrapment, but I can fight. And I can fight back. I can speak loud, and I can fight back on and on and on and on. And that's what we did. We did with AB 357. 2 years took us to get there. 2 years. There's a witness on my back, okay? And we're going for another one too, AB 25. We're going for that. And finally, people in the government, people with a lot of power, saying, yes, let's do this. And that's what we're going. AB 25 will not only decriminalize sex work in the state of California. It's not going to make it illegal, but it's not going to make it illegal either. Yes, we are right there. So enough of drama. I'm here to tell you my story, and my story is that I'm going to fight. They're going to speak loud, and I'm going to fight harder no matter what. With that said, so thank you very much.
Mariah, whose role during this commission will be to take the stories from our witnesses and talk to us about what human rights are violated by the actions taken against them. Mariah?
Well, I first want to thank you, Luisa, for speaking today and letting us know about your experiences with harassment from police and also entrapment. When you were speaking, I know you didn't go into many details about what you've experienced, but from what you shared, it sounds like you've experienced a great deal of harm and abuse from law enforcement, and specifically being targeted for the work that you do. So it makes me think of the violations you may have experienced in terms of your choice of employment and freedom to choose the work that you want to do or that is best suited for your situation. I also note that you are a migrant trans Latina activist, and so through police harassment and entrapment, you face potential violations of your right to freedom of assembly, freedom to be an advocate and do that safely. And also because you are a migrant and you're doing this work in the United States, that through law enforcement intervention on the work that you're doing, there is the potential that your freedom of movement would be infringed upon. I also note that because of entrapment and harassment from law enforcement, the things that lead to a criminal record in this very unjust system that we live within in the United States, that there are a flow of different violations that can occur from that, including working through an immigration proceeding that would allow you to eventually vote in this country, and that with a criminal record, that could be infringed upon as well. I also see just the freedom of expression being potentially violated, and also with detention and harassment from law enforcement, just the freedom from arbitrary detention, which is one of your rights as well. So that is what I noted in your story, and just thank you again for being here and sharing with us what you've been through.
Remember at the beginning I talked about protection versus punishment. There's a law that we're fighting in Maryland. We're fighting to get it repealed. And the portion of the law that we called out in our testimony outlines the two violations that will send you to jail. The first one is taking the organ of another person in your mouth or placing it in an animal's mouth. Same sentence. The second is placing the organ of another person in someone else's mouth or in an animal's mouth. Who are we protecting? And I wonder if the people in Maryland know that oral sex will get them a jail sentence. We talked about that in our testimony, because the issue is not to prevent. The issue is to punish. which is a terrible segue to our next witness. I am very pleased to introduce you to Cornell Holden. Cornell is an accomplished baker and pastry chef from New York City. He was the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit challenging the Port Authority and New York and New Jersey police departments' illegal practice of targeting men perceived to be gay for false arrest for public lewdness in the men's restroom of the busy Port Authority bus terminal. When not busy standing up to unfair policing practices or baking incredible cakes, he can often be found at the gym or traveling with his friends. Please join me in welcoming Cornell.
Okay, hi, my name is Cornell. Okay. I'm not really good at public speaking, so bear with me. I want to thank the Woodhull Foundation for inviting me here. So I guess I'll get into my story. So one morning, I used to work overnight, and I do a lot of custom cakes on my days off and stuff. And one morning, I had to go pick up some cake supplies from the store, and I was traveling into the city. I had to stop to use the bathroom. It was in spring of 2014, and I went to use the bathroom in Port Authority. Like, I've been there before. It's not a big deal. And as I'm using the restroom, there's a guy standing next to me. He steps back and kind of looks at me, and then walks away. And I thought it was kind of weird. So, but I just continued to do what I need to do. I left. As I'm leaving the bathroom, I get approached by two officers, and they tell me, like, they come to me, they ask for my ID, and I'm like, what's going on? They don't say anything. They just ask for my ID, and they start to put me in handcuffs. I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? What's going on? And then they said they didn't, but someone else witnessed me doing a lewd act in the bathroom. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they just continue to bring me to the police department that's over there. And as we get downstairs to the office or whatever, I see the guy who was standing next to me. And he go, yeah, that's the guy. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, I saw you were in the bathroom, like, doing a lewd act. I'm like, what are you talking about? What was I doing? He was like, you know what you did. And we're going back and forth, and they put me in a jail cell, and they were congratulating him on his collar or whatever they said. And I'm in the back listening to this, and they started joking around, and one of them called him the gay whisperer, because apparently he does this a lot. And I was in there for like maybe a couple of hours, and then I got a bench warrant for me to come to court. It was actually the Monday after Pride. I had to come to court for this. And I didn't really know what I was fully being charged with until I met with my legal aid attorney that day. And she said, she read it off, what they said to me, and I just completely said, that's bullshit. I remember that distinctly. And we get to the judge. They try to read out what they wanted to charge me with. And they wanted to put me on the sex offenders registry, and a $1,000 fine, and I think it was a year in jail. We fought it. We went back and forth to court like 3 or 4 times every couple of months. They finally dismissed the case. It wasn't until then that, like, during this process, that there was a pattern. They found out there was a pattern with my legal aid lawyers or whatever. There was a pattern of them constantly harassing and arresting men, and everything was the same. Literally, the police reports were the same. They just changed the name.
I'm sorry. So we've been going through this from 2014 till it was, from 2014, it was dismissed. When was it dismissed? I think 2017. That's when we started the lawsuit around 2017. It was just settled this year, well, last year, 2022. What else? Yeah, we settled because there was we want a reform done, and that was one of the reasons why I went through being the plaintiff in the lawsuit, because I was tired of having to deal with this, and I was pissed to find out that they were doing this to so many people. I didn't realize that was like a natural thing for them. They were doing this for years, and a lot of people were too embarrassed or too scared to stand up and say anything, and I was just too angry to give a fuck. Excuse my. So I have to thank Molly. She was a big help with going through this and going over with me, and I'm kind of glad it's over now. I'm glad we did the work to kind of make some kind of change, and yeah, that's about it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
One person to get pissed enough to stand up and say enough. Thank you. Mariah.
Thank you, Cornell, and I'm really sorry that you were put through all of that, and I'm really grateful for you also being here today and sharing your experience with us, and for all you did to fight for your rights. I'm just very, very grateful to you. So when you were telling your story, one thing that stood out is that you had to go to court the day after Pride, and even that, I think, infringed upon your right to engage in culture and the arts, to be part of your community and to be part of this celebration of the LGBT community, and how this experience actually really infringed upon that right to be part of culture. And that's a really important right that I don't think we necessarily think of all the time, but I see that in your case, it really did impact your ability to be fully part of the community that you are a part of. I also, as I spoke about with Luisa, if the case had gone forward and you had been in prison, that would be violating your right to freedom. Also, all of the implications that come with a criminal record, again, engaging in the right to vote, to be part of the government within the country that you reside in. I also think about just the equality in front of the law, that through this experience you found that many other people were also being profiled from the LGBT community, and that really infringed upon their right to be seen as whole, entire people in front of the law and to be treated with equality. I also just think about the implications of people being profiled and the right to life itself, that in this environment that we live in this country right now, with the hostility that we're seeing and the violence that we're seeing perpetrated against the LGBT community, that the actions by law enforcement, the entrapment, the harassment, is really feeding into that culture of violence against LGBTQ people. I also think just the presumed innocence. It is your right to be presumed innocent, and I think that was very clearly violated in the course of what you experienced, and also just freedom of expression and thought. And I also think that through that experience, your freedom for an adequate standard of living, and also your right to health. These sorts of harassing experiences, the engagement with the criminal legal system, has implications for somebody's mental and physical well-being, and you have a right to health, and this is also, I see, as like a real violation of that as well. So thank you again, and I am very sorry for everything.
So that law I told you about in Maryland, how did we find out about it? 4 gay men were having sex in a locked room. They had locked the door. When the police burst through the locked door and arrested all of them, charging them under this particular statute. Eventually, the charges were dropped. But getting charges dropped doesn't give you back what you lose when you're arrested and charged with something. Forever after, when you go to apply for a job, that's generally one of the questions. Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been charged with a crime? That carries you forever. That's part of the work we're all trying to do, to change criminalization of things that should not be criminalized. There's no reason to. We punish people engaged in sex work. Why? Because it's sex. People don't talk about the fact that it's work. And if you think that that it, maybe it does make sense, and I'm going to assume no one in this room thinks that, but if you did think that, then just think for one moment that you're punished for engaging in a consensual sexual expression. It's not legal to do that, but it's okay to clean someone's toilet or farm someone's fields or work in a nail salon, inhaling all those fumes. That's okay, but if it's about sex, it's not okay. Our next witness is Fatima Malik Shabazz, originally from Brooklyn, New York. She's a longtime resident of Los Angeles and the CEO and president of Fatima Speaks, LLC, a transgender-led, African-American-owned and operated business that consults on cultural sensitivity and competency trainings for businesses and organizations of all sizes, as well as participating on panels and motivational speaking engagements. Ms. Shabazz is an activist and advocate for the rights of the LGBTQ+ population, as well as a social justice advocate and a prison abolitionist, and is a formerly system-impacted individual. Ms. Shabazz is also a staunch proponent of political injustice reform through being a stakeholder. Please join me in welcoming Fatima.
Hello, everybody. Thank you guys for showing up. First of all, let me thank Woodhull for inviting me. People never know what they're going to get when they invite me because I am probably the most non-politically correct person since Lenny Bruce and Richard Pryor. Right? I cuss like a sailor, so excuse me. I apologize ahead of time. Right? Thank you for Senator Weiner for showing up. I'm also the lead on the policy and advocacy team that helped write SB 357. And lately, like he mentioned, we have some backlash, mostly from Tucker Carlson, who I like to say, fuck you. I will excoriate that dude any day of the week, explaining my position. If you attack my team, you attack me, I take it personal. So, they told you who I am, let me tell you what I'm not. I'm not a bitch, I'm not a punk, I'm not a sissy, I'm not a hoe. Right? I don't ask for a whole lot, I ask you. If you don't like me, that's fine, I don't really care. Watch your tone, keep your distance, keep your damn hands to yourself. I don't like to play games. We are all human. We all are more similar than we are dissimilar. Please understand that. We all have to do the same things. I got to pay bills just like you do. I'm always stressed about who's paying me, when they're paying me, how I'm getting paid, and I will knock on your door if you are late. Because I have to, we do the same things. We live the same life. So when we talk about what harassment is, we need to have harassment context into context. There are a whole lot of things that can constitute harassment that you don't even think are harassment. When you get arrested on the street for anything, especially for a sex crime, it is not just simply an arrest. It is an act of violence. period. It is an act of violence. It is a traumatizing effect on the people that it happens to. When they place you in jail, especially places like Rikers Island and LA County Jail, your life is subject to end before you even find a bed. You know, that can happen at any given moment. I am system impacted. I did 18 years for something completely, you know, unrelated to sex work or anything of that nature. However, within the system, you are profiled. You are, you know, segregated in non-segregated areas. You are put in cells with people who clearly say that if you put that person in my cell, I'm going to hurt him. You know, and it has happened. I went to bat for the life of a girl who was put in a cell with a guy who told the police that if you put her in here, I'm going to kill her, and he did. He did, right? And the police officers claim that they didn't move her because he was doing count time. You know, now I spent some time in the system. They can move you doing count time because I've had a couple of cell fights. People misunderstand me. They judge me. They think that because I identify as a female that, you know, I'm your victim. In a cell fight, need 3 other people, guarantee you I walk out. So, I know that they can move you during those times. They are supposed to move you during those times. Even if they can't move you, they sit you someplace to keep your safety intact. But they didn't do that with her, and she died as a result of that. That is harassment, is a form of violence before the actual violence even happens. You know, it's ridiculous that I could be walking down the street, and just to preface this, right, I just got arrested like, a week ago. Not even a week ago, a couple of days before I came here, because I went down to the track. I still work the track. You know, I don't have to, but I do. You know what I'm saying? I love what I do. I love the girls down there. We're friends. We have a camaraderie. We protect each other. We take care of each other. If you get robbed on my streets, I'm coming to find you and get that girl's shit back. Please believe that, because these people are idiots. They think that they can come down there and rob one of us, hurt one of us, harm one of us, and then come back to the track 2 or 3 days later like we don't know who you are. Well, I do, and I'm coming for you. Right? One thing you got to remember about me, if you never take anything away from this meeting about me, is that I'm a child of God and a soldier for this cause in every way. And I'm going to always stand up for my folks. Be you black, white, purple, green, blue, yellow with polka dots. You know, be you cisgender, transgender, non-binary, I don't care who you are family to me, and I treat you like family. So, yeah, these jackwads arrested me because, actually, they were arresting a bunch of girls, but I went down to the track that night so I can clear up some misunderstandings about SB 357 and the legalities involved in that, right? And while I was in the office with one of the girls, 7-Eleven down there is my little spot, so they kind of let me have their office to do what I needed to do. While I was in the office with one of the girls, that girl was accused of doing something that she could not have possibly done because she was sitting in the office with me. So the cops came to get her, and I refused to let them take her out of the office. Right, so their answer to that question was arrest me along with everybody else. I was the only one charged. I was charged with obstructing a peace officer, right? And peace officers, I don't know where they get that term from because those jackasses are not peaceful people. Right, so I took that case. I don't mind. I will do that for this cause. So in the cell, while we're going through the motions, we're not hearing anything. They're not doing any paperwork. They're sitting around watching videos, bullshitting, checking out the All-Star game, all this other crap. So I started to talk. I was like, listen, man, what we're going to do here? You know, we don't have a whole lot of options. So either you're going to charge us all, book us all, put us in the cell someplace until we can get this straightened out, or you're going to let us all go. So the cop says to me, well, you know what, you ought to shut up because if I came in there to kick your ass, then you wouldn't have anything to say. So I said, well, you know what, clear the house, come on in, lock it in, lock and load, let's get it done. You know, so the sergeant says, well, you know, if it wasn't for that jackwad that wrote SB 387, I said, well, I wrote it. So if you got a beef with me, let's get it done. You know, well, that changed the complexity of the conversation that we were having. You know, and then they got a little bit nicer, which I don't really give a damn about. Question still remains, what are you going to do? Why are we here? What are these women sitting in this cell for? You know, nobody is charged. I'm charged. You can charge me. I don't really care, man. If you're going to charge me and put me in a cell, fine, shut up, talk, and get me a sack lunch, find me a room. You know, but they don't want to do that. They don't want to take records. They don't want to keep records. They don't want us to see exactly what they're doing. But there are people like me. There are people like you, and everyone out here who have a voice, and I suggest that you use it. You know, I really do. I strongly suggest that you use it. Understand that leadership requires sacrifice, but you don't have to actually be the leader of a group or an organization or anything like that to be considered a leader and to remove the stigma of harassment and violence that these people cause us, that they create for us. The minute you open your mouth and decide that what you are seeing is wrong, that makes you a leader. And if you are not moving in that path and you are failing as a human being, I'm sorry, but that's a question. And that's the answer, and that's a solution. You know, so I've watched LAPD over the years remove sidewalk benches from certain places in the Hollywood district, saying that, well, we probably need them better over here because there's more population, there's more traffic over here. But they removed them because the girls would sit there occasionally to get some rest. So they don't want to sit in there. You know, so I've been bothered. I used to live right in the middle of Hollywood, and I used to walk every day down to the store to get a newspaper when we still had newspapers, right? To get a newspaper with a cup of coffee, and I would sit on this particular bench on this corner to read the paper. And I was almost arrested a couple of times from sitting there and soliciting prostitution. I'm like, dude, I'm drinking a cup of coffee and reading the paper. How is this soliciting prostitution? And even if I was, what the hell do you care? You know, I've watched some things happen. I watched two girls actually, who are trendsetters and movers and shakers on the internet, come to LA to have a good time and get beat up and harassed, right, by people on the street while LAPD either rode by or sat across the street in their parked vehicle and watched this happen. And people videotape it like it was the thing to do. You know, so I'm like, man, at which point, see, if that was your sister or your aunt or your mom or your niece, you know, that was happening to, would you be sitting there videotaping that and saying, hey, look, they beat up a sissy? You know, or if it was me, if it was somebody who had the ability and the wherewithal and the no problem with fighting with you in the middle of the street, would you do that? You know, would you be filming that? You know, man, I had a situation where I was coming from a party in Hollywood and these dudes in the car drove by and called me a faggot. I said, yeah, damn, dude, I'm 59 years old. Is that the best that you can come up with? You know what I'm saying? Like, I ain't heard that before, you know, but they had a whole lot to say. They had a lot to say. So a couple of girlfriends and myself, we all are former MMA amateur fighters. And for the record, I'm a two-time MMA amateur champion. So we hopped in the car, right, and chased them down in the middle of Hollywood, on Hollywood Boulevard, cut them off, hopped out the car, armed, unfortunately. And I went to the car and I said, okay, well, you know what? If you got a problem, we're going to handle it now. You know, you had a lot to say 6 blocks ago, but here we are right now. In the middle of the street, you, me, and your homeboy. And however you want to do it, me and the both of you, or, you know, I give each one of you a fair one, but you're not going to harass me or any of my girls on these blocks anymore. But this is what we deal with on a daily basis. You know, I attribute this to Cornel West, but maybe he said it, maybe he didn't. But he said the hardest job in America is being a black man. And the worst job, the most dangerous job in America is being a black man. So I'm a black trans woman walking in a bunch of streets that don't want me there. Imagine spending a day in my shoes. Imagine spending a night in my shoes, walking the track, working, doing what I need to do. People think, if anyone, I defy anyone to tell me that sex work isn't really working, then bring your ass out on my track and walk with me for the night and tell me that it's not work. Tell me that it's not some of the most dangerous stuff that you can do, because anytime you go on an out call or an in call or get in someone's vehicle, that may be the last time someone sees you. You know, so how is it that we can be harmed by the people that we rely on as customers and tricks, or however you want to call them, and you can't report that to the police because you are in a commission of what's considered a crime? You know, so butcher, baker, candlestick maker, professions. So sex work, prostitution, is called a profession. So how is it the oldest profession on the planet, but it is illegal? It's a form of harassment. It's an act of violence against a person, against your personality, against your sexuality, against your interior, exterior, and everything that is about you. It's an act of violence against you. It's an act of harassment against you. And if you don't see that, we're living in a different universe. And it's wrong. So I implore everyone here and anyone that's within the sound of my voice in the known universe to stand against these things, stand against what's wrong, stand against the fact that you can watch somebody be harmed, know they're being harmed, and think that, oh, fuck them, they're just sissies, they're just punks, they're just faggots, they're just out here, you know, hustling people and stealing and taking things from folks. Come on, man. Let's be for real about who we are and what we are. If we claim to be the greatest country on earth, act like that. Act like that. Show people that there is a real reason to come here other than making money and taking it back to their folks. You know, there's a reason we are that we're supposed to be as strong as we are, because we have this diversity, because we have the things that are needed to show people that they are human beings, that they exist in an environment where they don't have to be harassed. They don't have to be, you know, subjected to acts of violence. But as a black person, we understand that. That shit don't, you know, the good ship Jesus in 1619 told us about that. You know, that you are only as good as the dominating class sees you to be. Well, unfortunately, I'm queen of the jungle wherever I plant my damn feet. And that's just the way it's going to be. And I am a devout follower and practicer of bitchcraft, which is the ability to tell somebody, which is the ability to piss people off telling them the truth. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to tell you that it's blue, try to convince you that it's purple when it's really yellow. That's not what I do. I don't want anyone else here to do that. I want you to understand that we live in a life where people are intent on destroying us. Human Health and Services Commission told us a few years ago that they want to remove the word transgender from the lexicon, which basically says we want to remove you from existence. It's an act of violence. It's an act of harassment. It's an act of throwing away people. And we can't allow that to happen. We have 22 or possibly even more states right now spending taxpayer dollars to actively create and write laws against trans people. We got this jackwad in Florida with the no woke bill. What are you, an idiot, man? Where did you grow up? You know, this is what we are dealing with in the culture that we live in right now. But we still claim to be the greatest country on earth. We're not. I'm sorry. You know, we're not. And until we get these things in order, until we get these things right, until people stand up, stand out, and show out, this is what we're dealing with. So I'm here today to say thank you for coming. And I hope that when you walk out of this convention, walk out of this conference, whenever that day may be, whether it be today, tonight, tomorrow, the next day, that you keep in mind that everything that happens to us could happen to you. For any reason whatsoever. You know, thank you for your time.
Wow. Everything that Fatima said. Again. Mariah, please.
Thank you, Fatima. That was very powerful, and you spoke to a lot of issues, not just with harassment and entrapment on the streets, but also what happens once people are arrested and put in prison. That spoke very clearly to how the prison system, how the criminal legal system leads to loss of life and people's right to life and liberty being infringed upon. I'm very sorry for the people that you've lost in doing the work that you've done. Also, as an advocate, it is very clear that the work that you've been doing is being infringed upon by the police when you're out there, you're advocating for your community, and they're ending up arresting people while you are lawfully assembling and advocating for your human rights. I also picked up when you're talking about them removing benches from places in public spaces, and it specifically seemed to lead to people not being able to rest while they're working. And you actually have a right to rest and leisure. You have a right to take breaks while you're working. And you also have a right to choose your employment. And laws that criminalize sex work in particular infringe upon all of those rights. Also, as you were speaking, I just think about the security of your individual person, that is a right that you have, that these laws that harass people, that target the LGBTQ community, that target sex workers, really infringe upon those rights as well. Freedom from arbitrary detention, arbitrary interference from law enforcement as well, and as I've spoken about with previous speakers, just equality before the law. So thank you very much for all of your testimony and all of the work that you've been doing on behalf of your community and on behalf of everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, Mariah. I'm going to introduce you now to our last witness for this commission, Gary McCoy. Gary is the Vice President of Policy and Public Affairs at Health Right 360, where he oversees government and external affairs, press and media relations, and advocacy efforts on behalf of Health Right 360, its workers, and clients. Gary experienced homelessness as a young adult, having lived on the streets of San Francisco throughout his 20s with a substance use disorder. Since getting back on his feet over a decade ago, Gary has been heavily involved in advocating for policies and spearheading public health responses that directly relate to people experiencing homelessness, people in recovery from substance use disorder, people involved in the criminal justice system, and life-saving harm reduction approaches for people who use drugs. Please join me in welcoming Gary.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to get a lot in a very short period of time. So, I moved here in, say, my very, very early 20s. Moved to San Francisco, was going to get a fresh start. Had a lot of challenges in my teenage years, growing up in a very conservative area of Virginia. And so I came over to San Francisco. Everything was great for a couple of weeks. I had a job working at a radio station here. Previous life, I worked in the music industry and record labels and things like that. And a few weeks in, I was waiting at 16th and Mission near the BART station for a bus. And while I was there, saw a gentleman experiencing homelessness and gave him a couple cigarettes and some change. And in the process of doing that, I missed my bus. And so I went and got a donut for myself, bought him a donut, got the next bus. About 2 blocks down the street, on the bus, minding my own business, the guy sits next to me, says police. I started laughing, thought he was joking. He said police, put his hand on my neck, showed me his badge. He said when the bus stops, we're getting off. I said okay. We get off the bus. He starts searching me. He finds an empty clear baggie in my pocket, says he's arresting me and walking me over to Mission Station. So we get to Mission Station, and as we walk in, I see the gentleman from the bus stop that I had given change and cigarettes to had already been handcuffed and was on the wall in the station. And I kept asking him, what am I being charged with? What's going on? He said, we're charging you with possession, intent to distribute. There were like 3 other charges. I don't even recall what they were at this point. But so I was in a panic. I was like, I think this was like a Thursday. I had the Friday off. I had to be back at work on Monday. I was worried about losing my job. I went in front of a judge the next morning. He wouldn't give me OR, wouldn't release me on my own recognizance because I had only been here for a very short period of time. I didn't know anybody. He was concerned I would be, some kind of like risk and not come to court. And so I sat in jail for the weekend. While I was in jail, I sort of befriended somebody else that was in there, and was telling him how I was concerned. I didn't know anybody here. I couldn't find anyone to come bail me out. I didn't have any family here, and I was concerned about losing my job. He said, well, if I get out, then I'll come get you. And I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And that Sunday night, they told me to roll up my stuff. And I get out, sign a bunch of paperwork with a bondsman, and I come out into the hallway, and there's the guy that had gotten out that said he would get me if he got out, sitting in the hallway. So he said, after all that paperwork and I got out, had to go to court in a couple of days from then, he says, well, let's go to the ATM machine so you can give me my money back for the bond I just paid for you, which was a percentage, but it was a pretty high percentage. So we do that, and then he says, you have court in a few days. I'm sort of responsible. I signed for you to get out. I think you should stay with me for a few days. I said, okay, that's fair. Go to his house. There are other people there. They're all doing drugs. Start using drugs again. Not my first time using. And so, I met with a public defender to find out like what's going on with this arrest. And the police report said that they saw me buying a pink baggie and a blue baggie from this gentleman. The public defender said, well, that's your property. It says you had a clear baggie on you. And, there were a number of other things that were involved in this, but she said essentially, well, don't worry. When we go to court, we're going to get this dismissed. Like this is none of this is accurate. This is, they have a witness that says, you were 6'2", you're in the description of you, and you're clearly not 6'2". Just a lot of things in the police report that didn't jive. And so I go to court for my hearing where it's allegedly going to be dismissed. My public defender didn't show up that day. The judge refused to continue it to another day until she could represent me. And so that day they gave me drug court diversion. At this point, I had been using drugs quite a bit again. I had already lost my job that I was worried about losing from jail because I'd been using since I got out of jail leading up to this court date. And now I was mandated to go to drug court where I would have to show up every week and have a clean urine screen and do whatever programs necessary to get through this program. I also found out a couple weeks after this that I was HIV positive as a result of my drug use. So within a matter of 3 to 4 months of coming to San Francisco, I was living on the streets, had HIV, lost my job. Now I'm dealing with this arrest, and so I just stopped showing up to drug court. I started hiding. I started staying out at night because I didn't want to go out during the day. I kept getting arrested for warrants for failures to appear for drug court over and over again, and this went on for about 4 or 5 years. Ended up having an untreated AIDS diagnosis because I was afraid to go anywhere to actually get things checked out that I should have been getting checked out. And then, I finally snuck into the courthouse. I was tired of always having a bench warrant out. Put my name on the calendar, snuck back in for that court date. The judge said, why is your case prehistoric? What's taking you so long to finish this program? And he let me pick my own program. He said, pick your own program, get it done in 2 months. Let's just get this out of the way. Ended up going with a harm reduction program because I was not ready to stop using drugs at that point. I finished the program. A lot of other things happened after that. But it was very challenging because I always have that record that comes up. Everything that I had done, that record always comes up. In 2011, I decided to go into treatment. I finished treatment after 90 days, started volunteering in a lot of different places in the community. I mention that because when I finally got sober for myself and started to get my life together, the very first opportunity I had working was with then Supervisor Scott Weiner, who I had been volunteering for a couple of days a week, and he offered me a position working for him and a paid position, and I disclosed all of this to him, thinking that I needed to do that, but that he would probably rescind the job offer. And after I said all of that to him, he said, life has twists and turns. Sometimes stuff happens, and he gave me my first opportunity. So I want to thank you for that. And that's it. Thanks.
We're going to hear from Mariah in just a moment. The senator has another place he has to be, and so please join me in thanking Senator Weiner for joining us this morning. Mariah.
Thank you, Gary, for your testimony and for sharing your story with us today. You spoke really clearly about the both physical and mental health tolls that your experience had on you. So I think about how, as Ricky has said throughout this commission today, this isn't about protecting anyone. It's just about punishment. It's cruel, and it causes real lifelong consequences for the people who are ensnared in these systems that are not about protecting anyone's human rights, for sure, but even protecting individuals' safety. It really is just about punishment. You didn't speak to this specifically, but something I've thought of as everyone was speaking today is how this has implications for individuals' freedom to form a family, which is also a human right, and how being system involved really does cause harm to that. If you are imprisoned, you are missing out on family life, but also the criminal record that comes with harassment and entrapment by police can lead people to losing custody of family members, losing custody of children, or not being able to spend time with children who are loved ones. So I want to raise that as well as a consequence of the criminal legal system. Of course, for you, it interfered with your freedom itself and also your right to life itself. I think of all of the health implications that being involved in the criminal legal system have and the harms that it causes to an individual's well-being that could interfere with their life in many different ways. I also see that it had implications for your employment and your choice of employment, the types of work that you felt, even if you could get the job, that there is some self-censorship that comes with a criminal record. And that has a real implication on an individual's choice of employment. I also think about just the adequate standard of living. It has implications on housing, it has implications on access to food, and so many different things that are necessary for an adequate standard of living, which is also a human right. So those are the things that stood out when you're giving your testimony, and I just, again, want to thank you and all of the speakers today for being here and sharing with us. So thank you.
Our witnesses and our commissioners came from all over the country to share with you today. We're going to hear from the commissioners, and after they share with us their thoughts and reactions to the testimony, we're going to take a short break, and there are refreshments in the back. Don't touch till I tell you. And then we're going to come and have a discussion about entrapment, harassment, what each of you can do. Many, many years ago, I was feeling inadequate, like 5 minutes ago. And I was talking to someone I was very fortunate to have as a mentor, Jeffrey Montgomery, who was the founder of the Triangle Foundation in Michigan, an amazing human being who is no longer with us. And I was listening to his story of how he got involved in fighting for the rights of the LGBTQ community. And I said, oh, I don't have a story to tell. I mean, I started doing this because I couldn't stand to see the harms being done to people. And he said, that's the most powerful story that there is for people who aren't directly impacted by what they hear and what they see, to stand up and say, no, enough. You can't do that anymore. So maybe you've never been arrested. Maybe you've never dealt with being a street-based sex worker. Maybe you've never been a sex worker. Maybe, well, it's not likely that there are many people here who aren't a member of the LGBTQ community, but maybe that's never directly impacted your life or your employment. The one thing that we all have in common, every one of us, is that we're human beings. That's why talking about human rights violations is so important. That's where we unite. And that's the voice that needs to be raised to say, enough. This cannot continue. If you hurt my brother or my sister, if you hurt somebody I care about, if you hurt someone I don't know, you're hurting me. Because when you're done with them, you're going to come for me. On that incredibly cheerful note, I'm going to introduce you to the commissioners. I'm going to do your intros first, and then you'll go in line and share your comments. With us this afternoon is Molly Gifford. Molly is a staff attorney in the Law Reform and Special Litigation Unit at the Legal Aid Society in New York City, where they challenge police misconduct and seek accountability through litigation and policy reforms. Molly served as counsel for the plaintiffs, you heard about this morning, in Holden v. Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a case that successfully challenged the Port Authority police for their illegal practice of profiling and targeting men perceived to be gay for false arrest for public lewdness. Welcome, Molly. Next to Molly is Nicole Armstrong. Chief Operating Officer for the Department of Police Accountability for the City of San Francisco for the past 5 years. Prior to that, Nikki was a special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Welcome, Nikki. Matt Sutton is the Director of Public Relations for the Drug Policy Alliance, DPA, and Drug Policy Action. Is that also DPA? Yes. Okay. In case you didn't think I was actually paying attention to what I was reading. Serving as the primary liaison between the organization and members of the media, in addition to overseeing DPA's public narrative work. Since joining DPA, Matt has been instrumental in changing the national media conversation about drugs, the people who use and sell drugs, the overdose crisis, and drug decriminalization. Among other victories, Matt led Drug Policy Action's national communication strategy for the Measure 110 campaign, which made Oregon the first state in the nation to decriminalize personal possession of all drugs and to greatly expand access to addiction services. Please join me in welcoming Matt. Molly, would you begin, and we'll just go in order. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ricky, the Woodhull Foundation, for having this, Mandy, for all the coordinating, and all of you for being here. I also want to thank the witnesses who bravely shared their stories and experiences with police harassment and entrapment. I found the stories just absolutely horrifying, but also, in a way, I think motivating in the way that they should be a kick in the pants to all of us, because there are things that we can do to challenge this kind of police misconduct and harassment that we heard about. I will focus on things that people can do. First, people who have actually experienced this, or those who know and maybe are supporting a loved one who has experienced harassment or entrapment. And then things that everyone can do. And again, I'm at the Legal Aid Society in New York City, so my experience is pretty New York City focused. But some of this stuff I think applies sort of across the board. So the first thing I would say to someone who has experienced this kind of police misconduct, or really any negative experiences with the police, is that it can be incredibly useful to create a record of what happened by filing a complaint. Now, I am not up here being a Pollyanna thinking that filing a complaint is going to fix broken policing systems in our country. It doesn't. But what I can tell you as someone who works out of one of the largest public defenders in the country is that creating a record helps give something to the criminal defense attorneys who fight the cases that come after you. And ideally, creating a record and filing a complaint would trigger an investigation and a whole disciplinary process that is supposed to work to get abusive officers off the force. I go up against the NYPD every day in my job. We know that system is broken. Maybe there are some systems across the country that work better. That's often not what happens from filing a complaint, but it does create that record, and that record can help people. And it's quite likely something that helped Cornell Holden's case get dismissed, because we were able to get a record of these just absolute bullshit arrests that were happening and continued to happen until people like Cornell came forward and spoke to the media, sort of made it public. That helped get a spotlight on the department to get them to stop. But it took creating a record and people individually telling their stories. And that helped get the district attorney in Manhattan to stop prosecuting the cases. Now, the DA stopping the prosecutions didn't actually stop the arrests. And that's a whole other issue, and I think sort of came up that sometimes the arrests, it's the process itself can be punishment. And so there is still a need to get some of these absolutely ridiculous laws off the books, because when they're on the books, even when progressive prosecutors choose not to pursue those cases, police can still make the arrests or harass people. So sort of two separate issues, but when someone has faced police misconduct, filing a complaint, creating a record, even if it doesn't help the individual, it can help people who face that sort of harassment and those arrests later on. Also, I think alerting the public defenders in your jurisdiction. Most people accused of crimes in this country are represented by public defenders because they cannot afford an attorney on their own. And so public defense offices should know about these patterns and often are able to piece together, like what happened in New York City, just seeing, several of our Manhattan trial attorneys who, started putting together that there's just this boilerplate language, several people who, many of whom identify as gay or gender nonconforming, were facing the same pattern. And through that, we were then able to challenge it. Now, not every public defender across the country has a law reform unit, so I'd recommend also checking in with movement groups in the area, and that can range from grassroots movement groups that can help support organizing, media, sort of blowing the whistle on what's happening, which in this case, Cornell did an interview with the prominent major newspaper that basically from that story forward, the police stopped the practice. Now we know it's because they were under the spotlight, so we still had a lot of work to do to make sure they don't start it once people's attention moves, but doing some media around it can help. So making sure that there's a record and trying to get some public shaming of the officers. For people who are hearing about these stories and want to get involved or do more, I would just say for all of us here, it's important that we remember police are supposed to work for the people, and this is like so obvious, but just has to be said, but all too often they are a brutal and occupying force against the people, and specifically Black, Indigenous, people of color, heightened at intersections. Don't have to tell folks hear this, but I think it's on all of us, but especially those of us who either identify with or maybe are perceived to identify with the groups that police historically protect, to do the work of accountability and calling them out. And so that can look like a bunch of different things, but it can look like paying attention to local policing policy, to funding of police. Why are our cities continuing to fund these, vice squads, these groups? We see in the Port Authority case that there were officers who, honestly, sometimes it's that there's so many of them and they're bored and they're supposed to get arrests, so they go looking around just to prove their worth by making these horrible false arrests. So why are we funding that? Does that make us safer? We need people at city councils across the country asking those questions. We also need people in the streets cop watching, and especially for those of us with privileged identities who are able to do that in a way that we're less likely to face police retaliation. If you see police interactions, stopping, pulling out your camera, watching, seeing what's happening, would caution, again, lawyer, have to keep your distance. Don't get in the middle of it. Don't interfere. That's how you can get, obstructing governmental administration. Also, that's sort of the bullshit arrest that they make if they're just not happy with what you're doing. So, it comes with risk, but it is, I think, a risk that more of us should take when just in the street. It can make a difference. And then lastly, and I think really, really importantly, is that we all need to be advocating for the decriminalization as well as just the repeal of laws that just don't make sense, that do not actually make us safer, but that allow police officers to continue harassing our communities. So things like ending loitering for purposes of prostitution, things like what we saw in the Port Authority case was that it was a quality of life or broken windows policing push to get more arrests, more summonses for they were using public lewdness and indecent exposure laws for people using the urinal, where that's what you're supposed to do, is my understanding, at the urinal. So why is that on the books, or some of our criminal laws are just so overly broad that they can be used for all sorts of things, and that we need to be pushing our legislators to actually repeal those laws, because as long as they're on the books, it gives cops a blank check to harass our communities. And so there are ways for all of us to plug in, and we just encourage everyone, no matter what type of advocacy and work you do, to be paying attention to this, because we all need to change policing. So thank you.
Hello. Sorry, I'm going to mess this up a little bit. So my name is Nicole Armstrong, said before. First, I want to thank everyone for being here in Woodhull and our speakers with your testimony. It's really powerful to hear from individuals and hear what happened. So thank you. Really appreciate it. So I had a bunch of notes, and I was going to talk about a bunch of different things that we've done at the Department of Police Accountability. But, so I'm in a unique position because I was law enforcement for a number of years, and I'm still close with a lot of law enforcement. So in my time as a law enforcement member, I've gone through 5 different police type of academies. I've been through a federal law enforcement, I've been through LA's, I've been through San Antonio, I've been all across the world, and I even did a bodyguard academy at one time because I'm a glutton for punishment. The reason I'm telling you about all these academies is I can tell you that I have not once received training on LGBT. Not once. From the federal, from the state, from the local, from anywhere, I have not received one training. I mean, I've seen the CBT that pops up that talks about discrimination, but nothing in particular that actually addresses a lot of these issues that are being talked about today. And I mean, that should take a moment, and you should really pause to think about that, because the officers, when they're going into situations, they have no idea what they're doing, and they're being trained by other officers, and they're not being trained properly. That's a huge systematic issue that we have across the nation. When I first started as a federal agent, I was at the Air Force, and I don't know if you guys remember all of those sexual assault violations the Air Force had. So I was with those agencies that were actually investigating sexual assault investigations. I've seen the cases where we had I was actually in the agency that investigated gay people. So I was with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So my agency investigated if people reported somebody was gay. So I was gay, hiding gay, while in this organization. So while I was there, I would see people that were too scared to come forward and say, hey, my spouse is hurting me, I've been sexually assaulted, and so we would try to find ways with our community within where we were stationed to try to help people. We should never do this as a police officer, so this is a caveat, but we would coach them on what to say properly on the record, so that way they wouldn't get kicked out of the military, or they would get, harassed or be removed. But I've seen cases where I've also seen transgender individuals being blamed for sex acts in order to prevent somebody from having to report, because it was adultery is illegal in the military, that they didn't want to admit that they committed adultery against their wife, and so they blamed, a sex worker on the street and said, they attacked me, stole my money, and forced me to get a blowjob, and now I got an STD from this. Surprising enough, we did not believe that person, but we actually had to get permission to re-interview the victim, or the survivor of the sexual assault, because you're not supposed to re-traumatize anybody that's been in that kind of experience. We finally were able to get the individual admit that he didn't want to admit that he got an STD to his wife, pretty much. But it's really surprising what tools law enforcement doesn't have, or the training they don't have. And I'm a huge advocate for training. So now I work for the Department of Police Accountability. I couldn't handle working for the federal government anymore, so I moved to another government, and I'm here in San Francisco. Our goal for San Francisco Police is to investigate misconduct that police officers do. And we, unlike a lot of other oversight agencies, have a vast investigative purview. Whereas a lot of other oversight agencies that you'll hear about can only investigate things that are passed on by IAD, or only raised to a certain level of crime or of allegations. We have the ability to investigate officer-involved shootings, all the way to traffic stops, and we see pretty much everything. But our thing that I think is the most important that we do with our department is our ability to affect policy change within the San Francisco Police Department. Now, why is that important? So we talk about one officer committing misconduct, right? That officer, you have thousands of officers, you're gonna end up with 5, maybe 100, I don't know the number, but you'll have a number that will be committing misconduct, but you have a number that won't. But they will still be following policies that are written by, by SFPD and the Police Commission. So what we try to do is we try to actually change those policies that the officers are following, using investigations, using different things that are brought to from the community to us so we can actually change things. So one of the things that was actually came out through our working was some LGBTQ policies on how to talk to people on the street. You know, we need to make sure that officers are using the right pronouns, that they're not just assuming things. We need to make sure that when somebody's being searched, that the officers are giving them instructions on saying, hey, I am going to search you for this reason. I am going to be touching your waistband because I'm going to be looking for a knife or a gun here. Do I have permission? If you don't, sometimes they're going to do it anyways, but I'm going to touch you now. Do you understand? Because that awareness is really important for people, you know. And one of my really things that we're proud of is the fact that individuals can actually ask who, or they can pick who they want to search them. So they can actually request if a transgender officer is available, they can ask for a female, they can ask for a male. They actually have that ability to do that. But this is unique to San Francisco. You know, this is not something, and I live, you know, not far away from here, but where I live, you can't put a pride flag up. And that's 40 minutes away from here. So one of the things that, you know, oversight agencies are really important to develop and really important for these kind of issues that we're talking about, because when you have police and you want to see what's going on, you want to know what's going on, you have to have an oversight agency that's not within the department. The reason why you can't have it within the department is because if it's in the department, they control the funding. And if they control the funding, that means they can cut the funding, which means they can cut the programs and they can cut resources. And, you know, people are going to want to keep their jobs. So like for my agency, we are outside of the SFPD. We became separate in 2016, which has allowed us to be able to do these things. Other cities like Oakland has a CPRA, which is a Community Review Board, but they work hand in hand with IAD, which then makes you wonder, is it really an independent agency looking and doing oversight? There are so many fascinating things going on with California and being able to see what police officers are doing. I highly recommend, if you guys have a chance, to look at the new bills, the Senate Bill 1421, which requires us to release records now for anything that's a sustained finding in a certain category, as well as Senate Bill 2. Has anybody heard of Senate Bill 2? Senate Bill 2 is the first of its kind across the nation. And basically, it's now requiring that any kind of record, and there's these 9 categories, including discrimination, if there is a case that involves these issues, it has to actually go to the Police Officers Standards and Training Board, where they're now going to look at the investigations. And if they find misconduct and they agree with our finding, officers now may lose their license to be police officers. You know, why is that huge? You know, and I'm going to go into the weeds and I'll stop and pass it on. It's huge because what we would find when we would have misconduct, or we'd find misconduct, officers, right as we were going to go do discipline or have the chief, we would recommend discipline and the chief would do it, officers would laterally change to a new department. So they would go from San Francisco to Antioch, or San Francisco to LA, San Francisco to anywhere else in California, or even try to go to other states. So that way their discipline would stop and you wouldn't get to go forward. So that wouldn't follow them. So if you have discrimination, you have, you know, racial bias or any of those things, it would not follow the officer at all. This new bill, now it will follow the officer. Now we'll keep doing it and we'll be able to hold officers accountable for their actions. So the last thing I'm going to say is I want to thank everyone here in the audience. You know, I didn't know there was this many in the community that are here that want to fight these issues. So thank you. You guys are motivating me, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Hi, Matt Sutton again from Drug Policy Alliance, and yeah, I don't know how I'm going to follow all of these great talks here. So you know, I'm going to do my best here. But first of all, I really want to thank Louisa, Cornell, Fatima, and Gary. You know, thank you so much for your bravery and like speaking up against these abuses, not just here, but in courtrooms and in your work that you do. This is like, without you, like we could not change things. And so it's so important. I just want you to know how much we appreciate it. And I want to thank Senator Scott Wiener. You know, he's been a huge ally of ours at the Drug Policy Alliance in doing so much work here in California. And, you know, aside from, you know, his support for drug policy, you know, so many other amazing things that he's done that, as you heard, he's had thousands of death threats, and, he's stood up and done the work that nobody else will. And without him, we could not do this work. And, I want to thank Woodhull, so much for bringing me here and bringing all of us here together to, focus on these issues and stuff. I mean, this is really dear to my heart. And unfortunately, there's not enough attention to this, we talk about a lot of kind of, police abuses, but lots of times the way that the LGBTQ plus community is targeted gets overlooked. And, so many of us have been harmed for so long. I just, and one thing that I do want to, share that, wasn't mentioned in my bio is that, I too have like a long history of criminal legal involvement, starting when I was 18 years old, was arrested for drug possession, and so I know what it feels like. Like I can't necessarily, I don't know that I was entrapped, because of my sexual orientation, but I do know what it feels like to be arrested, to be in a jail cell, and also. For me, because it was related to drug possession, any kind of abuses or anything that I experienced either by the police or elsewhere was undermined because it was, well, you're under the influence of drugs. You're, so anything you say is not going to hold up in court because you were under the influence of drugs. And, so I think, what that brings me to here, and like what I really want to talk about, is that here's the thing. So as different laws have been created that have, eliminated, have, made it illegal, or prevented overt discrimination against LGBTQ plus individuals, simply for their identity, their gender, and you can't specifically legally target somebody because they're having sex with the same gender, even though it still happens, the police, law enforcement have found other ways of targeting our community, right? So they're using sex work. They're using drugs. They're using public lewdness, right? But it's not about those things at all. It's still about targeting our community. They're just calling it something else, right? And here's the crazy thing too, is like they don't even have to go very far. Like the same places that they were already that were already under surveillance, that they were already targeting before these different protections were passed, they can go and target us for drugs, for sex work, and stuff. And again, it's just an excuse that police are using to do the same practices that they've always done, so that's really scary. And in my work, we're working to decriminalize drugs, and we partner with other organizations too that work to decriminalize sex work because those two things are very intertwined. But the thing is, even if and when we are successful at doing those things, the scary thing is police are going to find something else. So just be prepared. We can do this work, but it's whack-a-mole. We're gonna knock one thing out, and they're gonna find another excuse, and that's really scary. And I do want to just point out some specifics too. Is what we know is 20 to 30% of LGBTQ plus individuals struggle with substance use, compared with 9% of the general public. And that, is mainly because of the trauma that our communities have gone through, from being rejected by family, by society, from, violence, all kinds of things that we've used drugs to cope. and you know, and because of that, and because of, you know, things like sex work, you know, all these, you know, these are also like survival things that our communities have had to use. You know, I used drugs to survive. Like, I'll be completely honest with that. If I did not have drugs, you know, I might have killed myself. You know, I grew up in a conservative environment and stuff that it was very difficult for me, and drugs helped me survive, you know, and so they helped me cope. You know, I didn't have any other coping mechanisms, so they helped me survive. You know, a lot of individuals in our community practice sex work because, you know, and this is not the only reason. You know, people, you know, sex work is work, and people engage in it because they want to do it, but also some people do it to survive. You know, when we're kicked out of our homes, sometimes like we don't have a lot of other options, you know, and like I've engaged in it. You know, I've had to do those things, you know, for one reason or another, and you know, and I might still do them. I don't need to do it as a survival instinct today, but you know, I can still enjoy that kind of work as well. But, you know, so just in terms of like what we're doing, you know, I at DPA, you know, as I mentioned, you know, we're working to decriminalize drugs because, again, that is, you know, one of the biggest excuses that police use to target and you know, harass our communities and lock us up. So you know, that's one thing that we're working on. That's one thing that we're working on ending. And also, you know, I want to point out that the drug war has also created a lot of the funding that goes towards a lot of this targeting, going after our communities and stuff. Without the drug war, we wouldn't have that kind of funding to go after these things. And you know, the other thing that we're working on is really replacing criminalization with public health approaches, because like I said, you know, our community experiences substance use at a higher rate, you know, because of the trauma that we've had to go through, and various different things. So like, you know, we have to, it's not enough to just, you know, okay, we're not going to do that, but we also have to like provide support for our community and stuff in the ways that we need that support, and it's never been given to us. So like, for example, you know, DPA worked, we were the architects of Measure 110 in Oregon, which made it the first state to decriminalize personal possession of drugs, of all drugs. And, you know, so people in Oregon now, you know, there's not that excuse, you know, that police have of, you know, however, unfortunately, the thresholds are kind of low. So, you know, it's not perfect, and they can still arrest people for drugs if it's over a certain threshold. But, you know, it did make a huge dent in police's ability to arrest people. And one thing that's funny is like police say like, oh, now we can't do anything. We can't arrest people for, you know, any kind of crimes, right? Like this is the excuse they give because they don't like, and I wish they were right, you know, because like I wish, like there's so many other things that we need to decriminalize, and you know, drugs is just like the first thing that we've done. You know, we need sex work decriminalization so much. You know, there's so many other things that our communities and other communities are targeted by. So you know, there's a lot of work to do. You know, and the other thing that I want to point out, and you know, and I've heard from other, you know, from some of our witnesses, is, you know, one thing too is it's not just enough to end employment and housing discrimination. We have to end discrimination based on criminal legal history, right? Because without doing that, like we can say all day long, oh yeah, we're going to end this, you know, and we're going to provide protections to LGBTQ plus individuals, but if we're still eliminating them based on criminal legal history, and our communities are more likely to have a criminal legal history, then again, there's this other excuse that we have for eliminating people from jobs and housing. And so if we're not doing that, then we're still allowing this to happen. And the other thing with that too is like we have to create pathways for people to get housing and jobs because we have been denied so long for these things that then it's just like, oh, well, why can't they get housing? Why can't they get a job? And so it's like, well, we don't have any employment experience, you know? We don't have any employment experience. We don't have like, housing experience. We don't have a job to get the housing. So, we have to like create those pathways, which, is one thing too with Measure 110 in Oregon. In addition to providing a lot of funding for what you would normally think of as substance use services, it also provides housing and employment support as well, because those are like really critical components here. So I just, again, want to thank everyone for being here. I think, again, if there's one takeaway from what I've said is that, like, we can fight entrapment once it does, entrapment and harassment, like, once it is happening, but we have to do everything that we can to remove every single excuse that police have in the first place of doing that, right? Because if we don't do that, we're just going to continue fighting and fighting and fighting. We have to prevent it in the first place. And, it's a lot easier said than done. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but like there's a lot of people here in the audience that I know are really committed to making this happen. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. And I really hope that you'll join us for the next part where we're really going to engage you and tell you what you can do in your own communities to make sure that, that we can fight this. So thank you.
Thank you, each of you. It sounds like a massive task list, doesn't it? That's what I wake up to every morning. I'm overwhelmed by about 8:03. I do want to thank the task force for having a commitment to accessibility that mirrors the commitment we have at Woodhull Freedom Foundation. And so I want to thank our ASL interpreters, and the task force providing them. Wow, when you make notes and your phone goes blank. So think about the dollars that get spent in Congress. One of the commissioners mentioned how much money goes to ridiculous exercises fighting sex. So think about the dollars that get funded to fight human trafficking that yield no results. Nothing, but it just keeps getting refunded. No, not refunded. Re-upped. Dollars that are spent fighting pornography. Dollars that are spent fighting sex work. Woodhull is the lead plaintiff. Woodhull Freedom Foundation versus the United States of America. We are challenging the unconstitutional law FOSTA, which stands for Fighting Online Sex Trafficking Act. Thank you. The whole reason for that law is because a platform called Backpage, the government kept trying to take them down. And they went to court, and they went to court, and they went to court, and they went to court. And finally a judge said, there's nothing that will take this down. If you want to take down Backpage, you're going to have to pass a new law. And that law was FOSTA. Backpage got taken down before FOSTA got passed, in ultimate ironies. But who got impacted by FOSTA? sex workers. Sex workers, because now anything that facilitates or promotes prostitution, according to the government, online is hideously illegal. It's like the prostitution-free zones. But you go to jail. If you're charged, you go to jail. It's a terrible violation. It's a terrible piece of legislation. And it's all part of the punish, not protect, punish. So othering, OTHERING. Othering is a technique that the armed forces use, where they other the enemy so that you can go out and kill because they're just not like you. It's not another 19-year-old person. It's other. It's the enemy. And you know where that's happening a lot? In Florida and in Texas. How do you stop it? How do you stop this wave of homophobia, of racism? Well, I think one of the ways that you stop it is with commissions like this, with individual stories, with real happenings, real impacts, real conversations. I think another way that you stop it is by finding ways to encourage individuals to tell their stories. Not everyone has the skill or the courage to stand up and share their story. We are very proud at Woodhull to have a project that we've now graduated 2 classes. It's called Spokes Hub. It is under the sponsorship of the New Moon Fund. And we are giving sex workers the training they need to be able to tell their own stories, to talk to the media, to write an article, to go and testify. And again, thanks to the New Moon Fund, we're actually compensating people for telling their stories because it's work. It's work. Bad laws. I just found out that you do not have to, if you're a juror, you do not have to enforce a bad law. So if you know a law is bad, you don't have to find someone guilty because that law shouldn't be there. I would imagine that if they question you during the jury selection, you're not getting on. But imagine if everybody said, no, I'm not, this person did nothing except stand at a urinal, right? That's a stupid charge. It's a stupid law, and no, I'm not going to find them guilty. There's all kinds of ways to use our voices and all kinds of ways to change policy and all kinds of ways to engage. Remember, it's about all of us. It really is about every one of us. If you don't have a story to tell, listen to the story someone else is telling. If you don't have a, dog in this fight, I got that one right this time. I tend to mix metaphors. If you don't have a dog in the fight, support somebody who does. It's our shared humanity. Our mission at Woodhull is to affirm sexual freedom as a fundamental human right. That's something we can all do. So I want to thank you for listening to this portion of the program, for engaging, for staying. I know it wasn't the temptation of the food, but I'm getting close to telling you you can get a snack. Please come back and join us so that we can have a further discussion about what we can each do, what we can do together, and how we can support one another in changing some of the things that are wrong, so that one day, maybe there won't have to be anyone to my left. We'll just have a celebration. Thank you, everyone.